Why don't we begin? Thank you all for attending. This is one of our series of financial planning webinars that we do each quarter. As you may know, for our clientele, we do a quarterly webinar in which 1 month of the quarter we do a financial planning oriented topic, and another part of the quarter we do a market and economic update as we review what's happening with our portfolios. Today, I'm joined by Jeff Perry, one of our advisory representatives, as well as Annalee Kruger, who will be our presenter for the bulk of our program today. And I'll give her a proper introduction in just a few moments. As an overview of what we plan to address today, we will be just touching on a few reminders about year-end financial planning considerations and promote an upcoming program that we're providing. And then we'll jump into the meat of our program with Annalee presenting how to be proactively planning for the aging process. And there'll be time for questions. If you do have questions throughout the program, it is possible to raise your hand or to type in something during the Q&A. Annalee, just to be clear, we usually, for the most part, hold those questions to the end. If there's something you'd like to do differently, just let me know.
Nope,
okay, that sounds like our plan then. So let's just touch on a few reminders as we move. Incredibly, we've just finished Thanksgiving and it's December 1st and we're already racing to the end of the year. It'll be here before you know it. Hard to believe how quickly this year has flown by. There are a few things to remind you about as it relates to your planning. So wanted to take a moment to do that. There are a few thoughts when it comes to changes from the CARES Act that still apply to your charitable giving in 2021. If you make cash contributions and you itemize your deductions, as an individual, you can make cash contributions and 100% would be deductible. Formally, that's 60%. For corporations, there's also some benefits of 25% deductibility. For people who take the standard deduction, there's still some benefit there as well. You can additionally take an above the line deduction for $300 for individuals or $600 for couples. When it comes to things like, oops, sorry, I don't know what I just hit there. When it comes to things like the donor advised funds, these are not treated the same. The donations for these cash treatments have to be the actual nonprofit entities, not organizations like a donor advised fund. But you still do get the 60% potential for the deductibility of those gifts, and 30% when it comes to appreciated assets. When it comes to charitable giving, keep in mind, sometimes it's desirable to utilize appreciated assets as a source of charitable giving because it allows you to avoid the capital gains that you would otherwise have to pay. The full amount of the gift is received, the market value is usable for the charitable entity or the donor advised fund, and as it might be. And there is some tax advantage treatment in that. And again, usually we're talking about 60% of that of your AGI, adjusted gross income, for that charitable deduction. So also can be beneficial if you're overweight in a particular position that's really done well, and you can use it as an opportunity to make use of that in other ways. We want to remind everyone about charitable contributions done through your retirement plan. Many times people use qualified charitable distributions. These are essentially when you are subject to a required minimum distribution, you can, instead of taking that distribution and paying an income tax, you can take that and contributed toward a charitable entity where they avoid the tax, as do you. So you essentially transfer funds from your IRA to the qualified charity. There's a maximum of $100,000 per person. This does satisfy your required minimum distribution for the year. And it does not count as income because, charities have tax preferred treatment. So it avoids the tax altogether. And it doesn't require you to do any itemization. So if you decide you're interested in learning more about any of these strategies, certainly reach out to us, as we may be able to be of help in the process in thinking about your financial planning and any charitable giving this time of year that you might be doing. One other thing we want to certainly mention is that there's the possibility of a ending to the backdoor Roth IRA. There's some move for legislation that would close this loophole. Essentially what a backdoor Roth IRA is, it's when you make too much money that you're not eligible for a contribution to a Roth IRA. You may be able to make a non-deductible contribution to an IRA, and then potentially convert it to a Roth IRA. But if you do that this year, you'd want to make both the contribution and the conversion in 2021 in case they close this loophole. There's some tax legislation and the Build Back Better Act bill that could potentially close this. Now, this doesn't work for people who have existing IRAs, funds in their IRAs. So, it's not for everybody. Keep this in mind. Again, essentially, you make a non-deductible contribution. You then convert that traditional IRA to a Roth IRA. If you have an existing IRA, there's a pro rata rule, and it doesn't work well for those circumstances. So you would not want to do that. This for people when there'd be no income limits. And by doing this strategy, if you were to try to do this, there's no tax on the conversion because the IRA contribution was not deductible. And presumably there's doing this where there's not been any meaningful interest accumulated. And then if you have other IRAs, it doesn't really become eligible for you to consider. So keep that in mind for this year. Another thing that's being talked about quite a bit this year is the possibility of whether to consider doing a Roth conversion if you have a large IRA. This illustration is showing a notion where someone retires, where their income drops off. They may not have Social Security started. They may not have distributions from their IRA scheduled. So they have a gap in their expected income. And so might they want to fill in some income in that space, because as we look at later years, their tax bracket gets very high because of increasing distribution requirements. So instead, they may choose to convert some portion or all or some portion of their Roth IRA within a certain tax bracket threshold, reducing the amount of tax that they would endure later on. In this particular scenario, we had someone who could save $1 million in taxes over many years by entertaining paying those taxes earlier on in the process, where the tax rates may go up as well. That can provide an added incentive to consider this strategy. Time is running out though. So for people who are interested in this, you want to do it sooner rather than later, if it's something you're really seriously entertaining, or at least doing the planning behind it to make sure it makes sense for you. Oftentimes people who consider this have outside funds to pay the taxes. You don't want to be drawing more from your retirement account to pay the taxes. Might have other cash flows as a way to meet their needs, that the distributions are less important to them subsequently. Okay, so additionally, We had some thoughts that were in, I think this is from a recent newsletter we had, but remember to take your distribution requirements before the year is over. This applies to anyone who is 72 and over, as well as people who may have inherited IRAs that have a stretch IRA treatment. You may want to review your risk profile. You may want to just review some of your big ticket spending needs before the end of the year. Use the balance of your flexible spending account or health savings account if you have those at work. Be sure if you're eligible for Medicare that you're dealing with the enrollment period, which is still, if you watch TV, you know it's still going on. There's bombarded by ads these days, but that period is coming to a close shortly. Shop any insurance policies, maybe a good time to do some review. Make sure you have the right coverage, the right limits for those products. Revisit your tax bill if you've done proper estimated taxes, in case there's a need to throw a little more in that direction. Check your credit report. It's a good idea to do that from time to time. And then start saving for a family member's future college, if that's applicable for any of you. And then always good to do an energy audit once in a while. So that's a few ideas. And don't forget, have some fun and plan 2022's vacation. Very good. All right. So let's turn things over for a moment to Jeff Perry. Jeff is our newest member of the team for the advisors with our firm. He is a lawyer as well, has training in a variety of expertise, but his passion for personal finance has led him to quarterback our effort to create a new program for that I'll let him tell more about. Jeff, let me turn it over to you.
Thanks, Chris. And I love that you used the word quarterback, because I'm just, one of the team members who have been working for the last 7 or 8 months, yourself included. And I also want to give a lot of thanks to Kathy Ingersoll for her help and leadership of putting this together. So something more mentoring. What we're trying to do is to offer a unique, comprehensive financial education and personal mentoring program all into one. And so this could be something that you might need. You might know someone. It's great for couples. It's great for children or grandchildren, or maybe your neighbor that you know that is struggling. There's a lot of reasons why someone might come to a mentoring program. As I said, one of the primary things is education. So each month we're going to have a different subject matter that we'll go over, and there'll be a produced video that each mentee will get the opportunity to watch. There'll be some homework, so it's not all just on us, it's on the mentee as well. And then there'll be a personal mentoring session where we will personally meet. I'll meet individually, probably over Zoom, with the client. And wherever you are as a client, it doesn't matter. You could be someone who has a good basic knowledge of finances, or even an excellent basic knowledge of finances, or you're just starting out. And Chris just put on the screen what some people might come to the mentoring program for. Some people are overwhelmed. They might find themselves overwhelmed by their financial obligations or debt. They're confused about how to invest. They want to work to build and understand a financial plan. We cover insurance issues. Do you have the right amounts? Do you have the right limits? Do you have the right types? And some people might just want to learn more about personal financing without having to worry about someone who's trying to sell them a specific product. So we take the clients as they are in a non-judgmental approach. You can come to us a mess, or you can come to us just wanting to learn more. Wherever you are, it's a personalized program that takes you where you are. Chris, if you go to the next slide, there's a summary of the topics that we'll cover in the 12 months. And as I said, each month we'll start with an educational video, probably about an hour. As you can see, month 1 is an introduction to the program and some goal setting. And so you watch the video, and then you'll do a little bit of homework, and then you schedule a personal mentoring session with me, and we'll go over, for example, in month one, we will help you set your goals in a unique way called SMART goal setting, which will be unique to you, and we'll make sure that you get them right. We'll make sure they'll be the way that you want them. And then we cover the basics: banking, assets, liabilities, budgeting, cash flow. You can see the first few months are going over some things that many of you know about, but we want to make sure that everybody has the basics. And then as the program goes on, we start to get into more specific topics that will be unique for everyone. For example, in month number 4, debt, mortgage, and credit. Some people are totally debt-free and mortgage-free, and some people will come to us overwhelmed by debt. So we'll take each month as you are personally and try to improve your situation, improve your education, and improve you taking steps which are aligned with month number 1 with your goals. And hopefully, by the end of month 12, we've covered all the topics, and you can see them there. We get into the 12 major areas of financial planning. The goal for me as your mentor is that at the end of this, we've covered all these subjects. Your education has been increased, and you have developed your own personalized financial plan that you understand and that you're taking positive steps towards reaching your dreams and goals.
Excellent. Thanks, Jeff. One of the things that we run into is most of the time when we deal with our clientele, they have means, they have some wealth. And although there are some instances where people would benefit from maybe just some review or some understanding of some of these basics, many times our clients have a lot of these skills already. So we thought whether it was for our clients directly or their friends or family members, this could be a useful tool in trying to help those who need a little bit of the foundation setting. And, Jeff and I remember we're talking, probably a year and a half ago, before we even contemplated Jeff coming here, and just talking about the notion that there's a gap in where services are provided and there's a need. Now, we are charging for this service, but trying to make it very affordable for those who would benefit from it. And so Jeff is passionate about personal finance and planning and goal setting. And so he's going to be the lead on this program, but with support from other members of the team. So if you know anyone who would be interested, send them to our website, amrfinancial.com, and they can learn more about the costs and the process. With that, let's move on to the meat of our, thanks, Jeff. Let's move on to the meat of our program by getting a chance to hear from Annalee Kruger. Annalee is just a powerhouse wealth of information. I had the good fortune to get to know Annalee as a consequence of a program I was taking that she was one of the founders in Plan for Life, who created the Certified Elder Planning Specialist program that I undertook last year. Every time I talk to Annalee, we've had her on the program, we've had her on podcast, numerous things, that she just has a great depth and wealth of experience and understanding. 28 years in the senior care industry. She's a national speaker and author, podcast host, corporate trainer. She also has her own company called Care Right, Inc., which provides comprehensive aging planning, caregiving support services, and coaching. She's written a recent book, The Invisible Patient, which I'm sure she'll get a chance to mention. Let me jump right in and pass the baton to Annalee. Thanks for being here, Annalee. Let's get you a chance to get started.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for having me on your webinar and your podcast and all of the support that you've always shown for care planning or aging planning through Care Right. And Jeff, you seem amazing. Like I have some people I think that we need to connect together with, because you've got those courses that really a lot of people need to be aware of, so that they can have the best possible outcomes. And the best way to have the best possible outcomes is that collaborative approach, and really making informed decisions for you and your family through education. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Some people are like, well, why do you do what you do? Like, why did you start Care Right? So I'm a social worker and a family mediator, and I started my career out in long-term care as a social worker. Back then, almost 30 years ago, one person did the role of like 8. So now it's a little bit different. But I had tours. I had families coming in for tours. They didn't know what questions to ask. They didn't know what to look for. And the tour itself would only take about an hour, but I was spending 2 and 3 hours at a time with each family, because they didn't know if mom and dad had their estate documents in order. They didn't know if mom and dad had long-term care insurance, or who's going to pay for care when Medicare gets done, or do my parents qualify for Medicaid because we can't afford to pay out of pocket for this. And so there was just a lot of questions that families weren't able to answer. The answers were always, I don't know. Our family never talks about stuff like this. Or on the flip side, I had adult kids that would say, Annalee, we tried to get this information from mom and dad. Like, do you have your funeral taken care of? Do you have long-term care insurance? Do you qualify for VA benefits? And the parents shut them down so much that, and gave them so much pushback, that the adult kids quit trying because they wanted to salvage the relationship, right? But then lo and behold, what happens? There's a medical crisis. Mom fell, she broke her hip. She's the primary caregiver to dad, who has dementia. Mom and dad keep all of these issues and challenges that they have at home from their kids. And then when that medical crisis happens, and that's when the kids kind of get exposed to really how challenging things had been going and not going well for their parents. So I started Care Right in 2011 to help families across the country have these conversations with mom and dad, preferably while things are still going well. But unfortunately, the reality is families often wait to have an aging plan in place until they're in crisis mode, and parents are medically complex, or the dementia has progressed, and now the adult kids don't always see eye to eye. So my goal is to try to reach families proactively and develop their plan in a proactive approach, because obviously you'll have much better outcomes than waiting until you're in crisis mode. So what is an aging plan? It's neutral third-party person to facilitate the family meeting. Like I said, that's why I started my company, to help families develop these customized aging plans, because families weren't having these family meetings and conversations, and they really don't know. Most consumers don't know what care options they actually have based on what they can afford. So we know that most families do not communicate well with each other. There might be a lot of family dynamics at play that, if you didn't get along 30 years ago and you haven't figured out how to communicate effectively by now, probably not going to learn overnight how to have a productive, effective family meeting just by yourselves. Most families do not know what they need to discuss. So they don't know, well, what is dementia, and what is our plan when mom can't stay at home safely because she's leaving the stove on, or she's wandering out in the afternoon, and you're getting tired of the neighbors calling you saying, hey, mom wandered out again. So they don't know what they need to really discuss. Most families are in denial about their loved one's true needs and the level of disease or progression. Again, it's usually around holiday time or a medical crisis when the kids kind of wake up and they're like, oh, mom's lost a lot of weight, or dad's really depressed, or mom hasn't been taking her medication for 2 weeks and we just realized that. So it usually takes some sort of action for families, or some sort of crisis for families, to kind of come out of that denial a little bit and say, wow, they're not doing as well at home as what we thought. During an aging plan, I find out what's working well, like what is working well with your current situation, and what's working less well. What are the challenges that you have at home? Does mom have so much pain that she's not able to get up out of her chair and go to the bathroom, and that's why she's having accidents in her chair? Is dad's dementia progressed to the point where he's getting feisty and he's not taking his pills or he's not eating? You know, what is not working well? I just have to say, no one ever calls me because things are going well, right? No one is ever like, hey, we saw you on a webinar or podcast, and we just want to get to know you. They're always like, mom wandered out of the house and she almost got hit by a car. What are we going to do? So it's pretty much always crisis mode, and that's just our human nature, right? We don't lose weight until the doctor says, okay, if you don't lose weight, you're going to have a heart attack or a stroke. You know, that's just our human nature. We just don't always seem to want to plan right away. We discuss health issues during the aging plan process, and I give you all of these bullet points just in case you're brave and have the courage that you want to try to develop your own aging plan. This is kind of the family agenda, or this is the process, in case you're brave. So we talk about dementia progression. I can always tell every single time when a family says, if dad's disease progresses or if mom's dementia progresses, it's not if, it's when, and what are you going to do for care? And how is that care going to get paid? So we educate and coach families on dementia progression, what to expect as that disease moves along, and what to watch out for caregiver burnout. We educate about coping with dementia progression. It's heartbreaking as someone who just lost a mother because of dementia-related issues. It's very hard as a family member to see your loved one just continually decline and not be the person that you knew. We teach them about changes in the mood, behavior, and personality, the changes in care needs and communication ability, and that they're going to need much, much more constant, eventually, supervision and redirection for their own safety. We also teach each other or teach clients about other chronic conditions, diabetes, renal failure, dialysis. So it seems like in the healthcare industry, they fall short in a lot of ways. And one of them is they give you this like massive diagnosis like dementia or renal failure, and then they're like, okay, well, good luck. So there's definitely gaps, just like Jeff found gaps in planning. I see gaps in people's planning too. That's why we use that collaborative approach. But that's one thing that's important, is really understanding what condition you have or your loved one has. And then just teaching families in general about aging, like falls can be expected, infections to be expected, depression, mobility issues, but there are ways to prevent these things from happening. But again, families don't know what they don't know. And that's why we come into place to educate you on how to prevent falls and how to prevent some of these infections and how to prevent or identify depression and other mobility issues. Once you lose your mobility and you end up in a wheelchair, now your options really can be quite limited on what care you might be able to get in some of these care communities even. What are the goals? Is your goal to age in place at home? That's most seniors' goals. We know that over 65% of seniors want to age in place at home, but what are the pros and what are the cons about that? So how has COVID impacted the healthcare industry? Well, we have a massive shortage of quality healthcare workers. So if your goal is to age in place at home and have all these companions coming in and out of your home, you need to be tolerant that the home care companies might not be able to provide a companion for the shift that you need, and they may not be able to provide the quality and the trained types of companions that you really need to be able to stay at home. And it's also expensive. So we talk about what are the pros and cons of aging in place at home, what supports are needed right now to make life better for all. Again, families don't call me because things are going well. Usually there's either been the death or sickness of the primary caregiver, and the kids are like, oh my gosh, dad just had a stroke. He's the caregiver for mom. What are we supposed to do? We didn't realize mom was so confused and she can't stay home by herself. So what supports are needed in place? So we actually take care of the crisis first, and then we circle back and take care of the longer term planning. what are the financial and insurance resources that we have to work with? So we know that care is going to cost money because Medicare does not cover everything that people think that it will. So, so what kind of financial resources do we have to work with? That's when I incorporate the financial planner so that we can use a collaborative approach and say, you know, Sally and Marvin want to age in place at home. What's the affordability? You know, how long will their money last if they do that? But we also need to look at what's the plan if staying at home is no longer feasible, what type of care community and where. Does it make sense for potentially mom and dad to hang their hat? What internal resources can we leverage? Like, can the family take lead on certain things? Like, if you come see your loved one at Christmas or holiday time and you see there's a stack of mail, you know, that's been there for quite a while on the counter, that should be your first sign that maybe they can't manage their own mail and their bills anymore. So there's someone in the family that it makes sense, like the financial power of attorney, who knows, okay, now I think it's time for me to step in a little bit more and oversee this and maybe even have to take it over. So what internal resources can we leverage? And then what do we have to outsource? So say mom needs, you know, care 12 hours a day and you all work and you all live in different states. It's not feasible then for family to continually be the primary caregiver, right? So we have to outsource that to a home care company, for example. What are the goals? We already talked about aging in place at home. The next slides we'll talk about in more detail the pros and cons of that. Care community options, when to make a move, where to live. Does it make sense for mom and dad to stay in Texas, for example, if all 4 of their kids live in 4 different states? Or what if you're in a blended hybrid family and, you know, you don't really even know kind of the rest of the family because you haven't really had any type of family meetings about, okay, well, if your dad has a stroke and my mom's dementia progresses, what's our actual whole family plan? Where does it make sense for them to live? And what are the time frames and goals? Maybe you know that, you know, I want to stay home for the next 6 months. Like up north, a lot of our clients up north will say, well, I want to stay home at least until Christmas, but then they want to move, for example, into maybe a care community or move closer to their kids. They want to have that last Christmas at home. Discuss everyone's current roles, like who's doing what. And by the time families come to me, it's the adult kids are the assisted living. They're bending over backwards, making sure you have your medicine, getting to your doctor's appointments, paying your bills, coming over to help you with getting bathed or dressed or groomed or groceries in the refrigerator. So usually by the time families come to me, their kids are their assisted living, and that's why they're burned out. Okay, next slide. All right, let's move us over. All right, so aging in place. Most seniors want to age in place. They want to stay at home until they absolutely can't stay at home anymore. As far as like the prevalence of this, and there's different research that shows different percentages, obviously, because that's what happens with research. But 87% of adults age 65 and over want to stay in their current home. 71% of people age 50 to 64 want to age in place. So the numbers are there that the good majority of seniors or older adults want to be able to stay in their home as long as possible. Obviously, we have an aging population. Baby boomers in May of 2011, the first wave of the baby boomers started turning 65, and the last wave in 2030. Today, we can expect women to live to be the age of 81 and men to be the age of 76. So we're living longer, but that doesn't mean that we're living healthier. That doesn't mean that we have a better quality of life just because we're living longer. So it's really important to take care of yourself as much as you can for as long as you can, and exercise and eat right and have enough socialization. Overcrowding of nursing homes and assisted living will create a problem in the future. We have more seniors than sometimes what we have residences for in senior care. Right now it's different because of COVID, and a lot of people moved out of these care communities so that they could be with their family. But I believe, my opinion is that as consumers feel more confident with moving their loved ones back into these care communities, they will, and then we'll be back in the same position where a lot of these good care communities will have long waiting lists of months to years, how it was before the pandemic hit. So the pros or the positives of aging in place at home, you're in your own home, right? Your parents are in their own home. They feel like they're going to be in a better mood or have a better sense of mental well-being because they're around their pictures, their own routine, their own home. They'll have access to family, which as during the pandemic, families were separated from each other if they were in a care community. And you can bring care into the home, which is helpful and can be successful if there is an aging plan. And we'll talk about why that is. Okay. And then the cons of aging in place at home. A lot of people think that it's going to be a lot better of a scenario than what they realize. What they don't realize is it's good to think that you can age in place at home when you're still active and you're still vibrant and you're still golfing or playing tennis or volunteering or traveling. But in time, as we all get older, those days are going to be numbered, right? So it's hard to kind of fast forward and wrap your mind around the thought of, well, what's the plan when I can't transfer myself out of my chair to get to the toilet? Or if I use a walker and I love to cook, how am I supposed to manage pots and pans and cooking and cutting things up when I don't have the energy or the stamina, or I'm in too much pain or have shortness of breath and I can't do the things I want to do? So we end up seeing a lot of social isolation and a lot of loneliness because there's just not enough mental activity. There's, especially coming out of the pandemic, and who knows what's going to happen with this new variant that's coming around. But we know that the cons of aging in place is that they don't often have enough socialization. Family can only be there so much. And at that age, as you start approaching the 70s, 80s, and 90s age group, their friends are starting to pass away or not be well enough to come visit. So we know that socialization is a huge problem. With socialization comes increased anxiety, depression, and memory issues. We know that the TV ends up being their main source of socialization and activity, and that's just not engaging enough. We know that the size of the house and the upkeep of the house can become overwhelming. Like, oh my goodness, I need to replace the carpet because the carpet's 60 years old and has the bubbles and they're starting to fall over the creases in the carpet, or the roof needs to be redone. So the house itself becomes overwhelming. Safety and oversight. If your loved one has Parkinson's disease, is the house safe? Is it senior safe? Or if your loved one has dementia and that dementia is, progressing quickly, are they really in a safe environment, or are they going to burn the house down or get lost when they're driving or when they're walking? Self-neglect, if there's not enough care oversight in place. A lot of seniors are self-neglect cases just because they don't have enough people checking in on them, or the family doesn't live nearby, and so the family doesn't know what to be looking for when they do talk to their loved one or come to their loved one. We know that self-neglect happens quickly and easily if they're not taking showers, if they're not eating properly, if they're not getting their medications renewed, and so now they're not even taking the right medications. So those are all examples of self-neglect. Or if they're hoarders and they're not taking proper care of their house and they're tripping over boxes and papers. It's expensive. If you have to bring in home care, now that's fine. If you've got the resources to do that, then that's great. I have clients, if there's two of you, you'll need two caregivers, right? So I have clients that are paying about 20 grand a month in home care for 24/7 care, but they wanted to stay at home and not end up going into like a nursing home. So just know that it's expensive, and that's why I engage the financial planner. If the family doesn't know if there's long-term care insurance or a life insurance hybrid or VA benefits that we can leverage, that's why it's helpful to use that collaborative approach so that we know what resources are available to help offset the cost of care if needed. Reliance on home care, the caregiver knowledge, how well are they trained, how compassionate are they? I have a patient advocacy division of Care Right, and I can just say with certainty that the quality of care has plummeted since the pandemic. We've just have a massive shortage of good quality care workers, and the good quality care workers are getting burned out because they have to compensate for those care workers that aren't showing up for their shifts or calling in sick. So the reliance on home care is going to make staying at home difficult. Like I said earlier, you have to be very tolerant, knowing that you're going to have multiple companions coming in and out of the house. My clients who have chosen to age in place at home complain about the traffic in and out of their home with all of these people that they don't necessarily know. If you age in place at home, you're going to have a nurse most likely coming in, a physical therapist, occupational therapist. So you're going to have all this traffic, and that's what a lot of my clients who chose to stay at home complain about. They complain about the cost. They complain about workers not speaking English or the language that the client speaks. So there's just a lot of things that you need to think about when you say you want to age in place at home. How feasible is it? Dementia progression and safety, we've already talked about that. Parents not doing as well at home as the kids would like to think. It again seems to take a crisis or a pandemic for kids to wake up and say, what is our plan for mom and dad? Because they shouldn't be staying at home. And then falls and nutrition, safety and scams. I can't tell you how many times families didn't know what to look for or didn't keep an eye on checkbooks or accounts. And then they find out dad's been scammed out of hundreds of thousands of dollars. And it's a pretty sick feeling coming to that realization. And some of that can be prevented if there's enough care oversight that can be prevented. So education is a huge component, just like with Jeff and Chris's business model. It's all about education so you can make informed decisions. So the next slide. I have to keep moving us over. Here we go. So that's the daughter. That's kind of the typical daughter that calls me just really tired, overwhelmed, frustrated, and burned out. So Merrill Lynch did a caregiver study. They found 96% of caregivers report caregiving is much more than just hands-on care. 92% of caregivers are providing assistance with the financials. So they're not only managing checkbooks or managing accounts, but a lot of sons and daughters are actually financially pitching in to help pay for the cost of care or cost of living for their parents. 41% said they entered the role of caregiving suddenly and unexpectedly. There's another study out there that says that 58% of adult children found themselves thrust into the role of family caregiving without ever having a family meeting about it. And these are the types of clients that come to me. They're like, we never talked about this, and now all of a sudden I have to take off weeks of work to be able to manage mom and dad's care needs. So these are my typical clients that call me. 1/3 of caregivers say they need respite or a break, but they don't get it because, again, they don't have an aging plan. 6 times the increase of 70-year-olds without children nearby in 2030. We already know that a lot of seniors are kind of out there on their own because families have grown apart. They've moved apart from each other. And if you only have 2 or 4 weeks of vacation a year, you can only divvy up that vacation time between all of these aging relatives and actually still end up with a vacation, right? So we're going to see more and more and more self-neglect because families just can't be there all the time. And if they don't have an aging plan or a patient advocate or someone coming in to check on their parents, we're just going to see much, much more self-neglect. 15% of caregivers took on personal debt to cover the cost of their parents' care. And 21% dip into their personal savings to cover the cost of care, and 30% cut back on their own expenses and their own lifestyle because they feel like they have to cover the cost of care for parents. Signs of caregiver burnout: irritable, you're resentful and angry. I can't tell you how many times I've had adult sons and daughters feel terrible and feel guilty about saying this, but they're just like, I've gotten to the point where I absolutely hate my family because they're not working together, they're not communicating effectively, they don't have an aging plan, and so those relationships will end up destructive. Feeling out of control, overwhelmed, they're feeling guilty about how they feel. They feel guilty for being resentful and angry and hateful. They have changes in their own mood, their behavior and personality. They have changes in their weight and their sleep. Their friends and family start expressing concern, like, we haven't seen you out for a while, or you just don't look like you feel well, you look exhausted all the time. So listen to what your friends and family are saying to you about, how are you doing? Your own physical and emotional health are jeopardized. Most sons and daughters, when they come to me, they're either getting therapy or on antidepressants or sleepers, or they really need to be because they're that burned out. You lose or you quit your job because you can't juggle caregiving plus work. We know that the average son or daughter primary caregiver is spending a minimum of 24 hours per week taking care of one aging parent. If you have two aging parents and they both start declining at the same time, it becomes a full-time job. So that's why it's important to have an aging plan and have what is our family plan so that you don't end up burned out or going broke trying to take care of parents. We know that most adult children won't take a job promotion or they're jeopardizing their careers because they are already trying to struggle with taking care of their parents and their own families and their own life. Burnout is you are paying out of pocket for your loved one's needs and again, jeopardizing your own financial future.
Well, Annalee, give us some hope.
I know. Well, that's why it's all about prevention and education, right?
That was a little unsettling, right? Yeah.
Well, it is, and I want to disrupt everybody to say, hey, don't end up being a statistic. Let's get together and let's do an aging plan sooner rather than later, so that you don't end up looking like all these people on these slides. Aging 101. Understand that the aging process is bumpy. I say this probably 7,000 times a week. The aging plan is the aging process is bumpy. The medical crises happen, hospitalizations, death of the primary caregiver, sudden health changes, urinary tract infections, a fall and mom hits her head, and now what do we do? Disease or dementia progression, falls, flight risks for those with dementia. That's right, Jeffrey, sad face. Caregiver issues like caregiver fatigue, whether you live near or far. COVID, families were overwhelmed with their care needs that their parents needed before COVID. COVID has skyrocketed family fear, concern, and changed their thoughts about care options. Because again, you don't want to necessarily move your loved one into a care community if you can't ever get in to see them, right? So it's really, COVID has definitely impacted even how we help our families with aging planning, because if there's not staff or these facilities aren't taking on new admissions, then what's your plan? Or if you want to bring mom and dad closer to you and it's out of state, some of these care communities aren't even doing out of state admissions. So again, what is your plan? Don't leave yourself vulnerable or you're not going to have good care options or family relationships either. And again, family dynamics. It's hard to get away from that. Everybody has their own perspective of how mom and dad are doing. Everybody has their own perception of how their inheritance should be spent. Everybody has their own ideas of what quality of life is like. Everyone has their own understanding of dementia. And so family dynamics are always part of something that we have to keep in mind during these aging planning and family meetings. One would hope the aging process would bring families together, but I'm here to tell you that it often does not. Everyone, again, has their own relationship with each other, and those relationships change through the course of time. Their own perception of finances and needs. Denial is a huge part of what I see on a regular basis too with families. Just they don't understand what the care needs really are, and most families aren't as prepared as what they should be. All right, aging and health. Common illnesses like urinary tract infections. I've had lots of families call me up just frantically like, oh my gosh, mom needs a nursing home because I was here last week and she was just fine and now she's lethargic, she can't move, and most likely she has a urinary tract infection. So it's not like you signed up for this webinar to learn about UTIs, but I have to say that is a prevalent common issue with elderly people. They're not drinking enough fluids. They're not keeping themselves clean and dry, and urinary tract infections are one of the leading causes of ER visits and hospitalizations. So it's really important that you know what the signs are. Pneumonia, dehydration, falls, weight loss, mental health issues like depression, anxiety, and just physical health declines, the aches and pains, shortness of breath, mobility. Those are all aging and health issues that you need to be aware of. Dementia versus delirium, just real quickly, dementia is a progressive disease. Like it's a diagnosis. Your brain is shrinking, and that's why there's changes in communication ability, changes in mood, behavior, personality, and supervision requirements. Delirium is a short-term acute issue. So it's usually a urinary tract infection or infection of some sort like pneumonia. Delirium can also be caused by medication reactions or changes in your environment. So you have a demented loved one and you move them from, Texas to Ohio where you live, you can expect some hopefully temporary increased confusion. So it's temporary, it's treatable. Dehydration is a common thing that we see with delirium. So it's an acute onset of change in cognition, but it's temporary. Once they get treated for whatever it is that they have, then they're back on track. Other common problems, again, I can't emphasize enough the lack of proper socialization and interaction. I can tell you that during COVID, when everybody was forced to stay away from each other, we've had an increase in depression and increase in anxiety with our senior population, and actually probably all populations, because they were forced to stay away from people that love and care about them. Their friends are dying. We already talked about that. And in seasonal states, half the year, no one is around. So like here in Florida, where I am, half the year, they're kind of on their own. And unfortunately, a lot of seniors, because their kids aren't nearby, they do rely on their neighbors for food and just kind of keeping an eye on how things are going for them. So
Annalee, if I may just point out, we're nearly an hour from our beginning of our presentation. I just want to let our attendees know that we're going to go longer. There's still some great content that we want to get through. So if you have the time, Annalee, assuming you're available to continue,
yep.
We'll probably go, I'm guessing about another 20 to 30 minutes of additional content. So just
yep.
to give everyone a sense of the pace of we're on, and we are recording the program. So if anyone's not able to stay with us, you'll be able to catch the rest on the website. Okay, sorry to interrupt. Thanks.
No, that's good. That's good, because I know we always pack a punch when we do the PowerPoints. There's just a lot of information, and I know a lot of it's overwhelming, but that's why you also record it so you can listen to it multiple times. So care options based on financial resources. What can we leverage to pay for the cost of care? So personal funds, your savings, your retirement accounts. What assets do we need to leverage? Do we need to leverage the house? Do you have to sell the house to be able to move into a care community, for example? Reverse mortgages, that may or may not be the right fit. That's something your financial planner can talk with you about. Long-term care insurance, do you have that in place, and what does it cover? What's the elimination period? Meaning how long do you have to pay out of pocket before the insurance company will pick up the cost? And life insurance hybrids, like I have a $1 million life insurance policy that can cover the cost of long-term care if I need it to be. So it's flexible that way. VA benefits, can we leverage those? And then Medicaid is Title 19. That's the government program that when you have depleted your funds and depleted your assets, then the state pays for your care or some of your care, depending on what your situation is. Levels of care, we've got independent living, so that's like a college dorm, right? So it's just a bare bones apartment. There's no care that's associated with that. You may or may not get meals as part of that independent living package. Assisted living is assisted living, so it's structured more of a medical and social model. So there's activities, there's call buttons or the fall pendants that you would be wearing. There's, nurses or companions on the shifts to take care of you. Memory care is a secured facility, a secured unit, or a secured memory care floor. In a lot of these care communities, it's just a floor that they've designated, and then they have a locked door on it. So you have to have a dementia diagnosis to be able to move into a memory care facility. Skilled rehab is where you would go for short-term rehab. So you fall, you break your hip, you go to the hospital, have your surgery, have your 3 overnight stays so that Medicare pays for that, and you go to skilled rehab for therapy, and then you go back home. Skilled nursing, that's the nursing home. That's the long-term care. So unfortunately, what happens when seniors say that they want to age in place, they stay at home too long, that now they don't qualify for assisted living. They only now qualify for nursing home level of care. So they're basically leaving their home to now go into a nursing home. And it's a very different look and feel and smell than you would have in like an assisted living where you have your own apartment. So in a nursing home, you may have a roommate. Those rooms are small. Unless you end up in a private room, but you would have a roommate, and they're teeny tiny little rooms. It's also very institutional. Despite them trying to make it as home-like as possible, it's very institutional because it's for people who really need that long-term 24/7 care. Adult daycare can be an option. That usually runs $16 to $21 an hour, but you get more bang for your buck in an adult daycare center because you can have bathing assistance, they administer your medications, you have activity, socialization, exercise, and a break for the primary caregiver. But again, there has to be an opening. So if you don't put a plan in place and you're not on the waiting list, you're not going to get in. Home care can obviously be an option. We've already talked about home care, where they send the companions in to help take care of you, to help you age in place at home. We also have hospice as an option. That's a Medicare A program. So hospice will help cover the cost of some of the medications, hospital beds, oxygen, incontinence supplies. So there's a financial benefit, obviously, to hospice, but there's also an emotional and spiritual benefit as well, because you have a whole hospice team of a nurse, social worker, chaplain, and volunteers to help make sure that you and the whole family is educated and as comforted as you can be through that whole process. One thing I want to say about hospice is a lot of people, they assume or think that hospice is just for like those people like right before they die, like a week or two before they're dying. No. So when we see, like I try to get my clients on hospice as soon as we start seeing enough declines that they would qualify for hospice. And I've had clients on hospice for months and years. So as long as you still meet hospice criteria, you can still leverage that level of care. And then palliative care is another fantastic program. There's no downside to hospice and there's no downside to palliative care, because again, it's about education and support. Palliative care is for people who maybe have renal failure and they still want to do dialysis. So they're not ready to like go on the hospice program because they still want treatment for their conditions. So palliative care is a really great option for people who have a chronic progressive disease and just need some more education and support. Okay, how to interview home care companies and care communities. So when I work with clients and we do the aging plan, we actually have like training sessions on all of this stuff so that you can make informed decisions. And we have a checklist that we give out to our clients who engage with the aging plan. But we have a whole, these are the categories of the things that are on the checklist. So you want to find out what is the training requirements and safety. And then on the checklist, we have like drilled down questions as well. But these are just like categories that we put on the slide. How well do they communicate with the family? What kind of family communication can you expect? What are the costs and fees? What are the room and comforts of this particular care community? What are the amenities? What are the environmental observations? Did the residents look happy? Were they well cared for? Or did you tour at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon and they still had pancakes and syrup on their shirts from breakfast? Are wheelchairs and walkers clean, or are they filthy? How does the care community smell? Does it look appealing from the curb? So just like if you're house hunting, these are things that you would want to know. Like, what kind of observations do you have? Activities, what do they offer? They all pretty much offer the same thing as far as different activities. They'll all have bingo and church and stuff like that. Meals, are meals provided? So in independent living, they may not provide 3 meals a day. So depending on what level of care you're looking at, find out about what is actually included. And then additional notes. What I do is I literally have like a notebook, and I put the facility name on top and then a column for pluses and a column for minuses and what are your observations. Because if you end up doing all of this in crisis mode, you might be touring 4 or 5 facilities, and it's really hard to keep them all straight when your emotions are also at play. So how to interview home care companies. Yep, same thing, cost, training, all of those kind of things. These are my little parents. They're just so cute. So that's my mom and my dad. My mom just passed away in June. All right, so how to be the best advocate. I always put these over on the wrong side. All right, so healthcare. Why do you need to visit often or retain a professional advocate to visit regularly? Because again, I'm here to tell you as a patient advocate, the care that you assume that you're getting or that you're paying for is probably not the case. So a lot of these facilities have massive, massive turnover in leadership. And when there's no executive director for 3 months, or there's no nurse manager for 4 months, or there's no memory care director for 4 months, it is the wild, wild west in these facilities, especially right now after the pandemic. It wasn't necessarily great before the pandemic, but after the pandemic, I'm appalled and mortified at what I see on a daily basis when my team and I go in and we do advocacy for our clients. You cannot assume that you're getting quality care by trained professionals. Common issues, lack of compassionate caregivers, lack of actually trained caregivers, especially in dementia care. The call light response time can be very slow. So like one of the things that I do with our clients, and we teach our clients how to also advocate for their parents, is turn on the call button and just wait. See how long it takes. It's taken up to an hour and 38 minutes before. That was in a facility last week. So obviously falls are going to happen. If you have to go to the bathroom and it's taking an hour for them to answer your call light, of course you're going to get up to go to the bathroom and then probably fall. So these are reasons why you need to have an advocate, or at least know how to advocate for your loved one. Triple diapered. I hate to even say this, but you have to check if your loved one is a vulnerable adult. Make sure that they don't have them triple diapered, because air needs to get to their bottom, or otherwise you're going to end up with infections and fungus infections. Poor communication between staff and between facility and family, and unfortunately unresponsive administration and corporate office, because the corporate offices tend to be pretty far removed from really what's going on in the day-to-day of their facilities. So I could have a whole nother webinar of just the top 20 things that we see literally every single week that we have to call these facilities or home care companies out on so that our clients can get the best quality care that they deserve. So know your rights. I'm not going to go through all of these, because you can also get a copy of this PowerPoint But just know that you do have resident rights. When you enter any facility, there will be this sign that says your resident rights. And so all facilities have to have this posted. If you've ended up in the hospital, you'll see a similar resident right poster and signs around the hospital as well. But really know what your rights are so that you can stand up for yourself and advocate for yourself. There's a whole bunch of those, right? You do actually have a bunch of resident rights. All right, and then if you still can't get a resolution and you're in a care facility, as an example, and you've gone through the leadership team that's actually in-house at the facility, then look at the corporate office of that care community and reach out to them and schedule a call with them with your complaints. If they also are not responsive, then another route that you can go is every state has an ombudsman, and that is an official advocate for those that are in the healthcare sector. So if your loved one is in a care facility of any level of care, whether it's assisted living, memory care, nursing, you can also go through the ombudsman. Unfortunately, during the pandemic, they were not deemed essential either. So there was no help from the ombudsman because they weren't allowed in these facilities either. State regulatory agencies, like in Florida here, it's ACA, it's AHCA, and that's who regulates facilities and hospitals and hospices and home care companies. So just see who that governing body is in your particular state, and you can file a complaint with them. Ongoing, just be vocal with your state politicians about your concerns with the care that you see happening, whether it's with your loved one or with others. That's what we do as well. We are constantly in touch with our politicians to say, look, something has to improve here. When I notified the state, when I filed the 2 complaints against the facility that my mom was in, because I couldn't get any headway at the local level and the corporate level, and the ombudsman was not deemed essential, I ended up having to notify the state of my complaints. And then eventually 8 months later, they were able to come in and do the complaint survey. But you have to be vocal. When I notified the Florida State Department that manages our facilities, the complaint intake coordinator said they get 200 complaints a day. So I'm serious. You have to know how to advocate. And if you aren't able to, for whatever reason, you have to have a professional advocate person, because this is what's happening in these care communities. Everyone has a vested interest in receiving quality care. Someday it might be you who needs the care. And what are you going to do if you have a broken hip and you can't get out of bed by yourself, and the staff ignore you or don't answer your call light, or they put 3 diapers on you because they don't want to take you to the bathroom every 2 hours? That's the stuff that we see every single day. And these people are paying $8,000, $10,000, $12,000 a month for care. So this is why it's important. Care Crusade, that's a nonprofit that I started a few months ago. It's a national campaign to fight for quality care by actually trained and compassionate healthcare providers, no matter where you find yourself in the healthcare world, whether it's in the ER, the hospital, home care, or care facility care. Everybody that enters the healthcare spectrum ought to feel confident that they're going to be properly taken care of. Gaps in planning is the next section. Grab and go binder. I can just actually show that to you here. This is my dad's. This is what it looks like for those that are on the visual webinar, the grab and go binder. It's a plug and play solution. There's 11 tabs in here. So like emergency tab section has like, who are the people on your team? Who's your financial planner? Who's the long-term care insurance rep? Who's your attorney? Who's your CPA? So it's kind of like who's on your team? Who's your medical providers? There's an insurance tab. So all things insurance, all things legal go in the legal tab. Divorce decrees, estate documents, anything legal. So there's a checklist behind each of the tabs so that it prompts you to say, oh, wait, I always wanted to look at long-term care insurance, or, oh, wait, yeah, we need to put this in here. So each tab also works as a family agenda item for families who want to try to facilitate their own conversations with their families and say, hey, kids, here's our attorney, here's what we have in place for estate documents. I named you, John, as the power of attorney for finance, and Sally, I named you as the healthcare power of attorney. Unfortunately, what I see is families don't talk about any of this. So the kids find out that they're the healthcare decision maker at the hospital bed. And they're like, what? We've never even talked about what her wishes are. So don't do that to your kids, and don't do that to your family. It's not helpful. So help seniors identify the gaps in your planning. Again, all those bullet points of getting your accounts and passwords in order, your estate documents, your insurance. If you name your son or daughter as your healthcare power of attorney, they ought to know what medications you're taking, what your end of life wishes are. If you've named someone your financial power of attorney, you need to give them the tools they need to be successful, because how are they supposed to help step in and take care of your bills if they don't even know what your accounts, passwords, banks are? So get everything prepared and get everything in order. We know that health conditions can change very quickly. We know dementia progression occurs. If you're the power of attorney, it will help you be more successful in decision making, because now you're not being sprung upon that, oh, I'm the power of attorney decision maker. No, those aren't just necessarily my observations. I can tell you we've got about 60 people in care facilities across the country, and we're having just a seemingly decline in quality of care across the country because of the massive turnover in healthcare. So the grab and go binder can prevent families from fighting because everything's laid out for them. If there's a car accident or accidents that might leave you incapacitated, whether temporarily or permanently, you never know. Like, no one who had a stroke or a major car accident three days ago woke up thinking, oh, I'm going to be incapacitated by this afternoon. I better have my stuff in order. But also hurricanes, tornadoes, fires. Why go through all the work of having to redevelop your grab and go binder? Let's just get it all put together and then copy it so you have an electronic version as well.
Annalee, could I just go back to the question that had been posted in the chat that was requesting, one thing that was implied in that question is, do people have positive experiences in nursing homes, or, it's not all negative, right? I mean, just saying you need to be an advocate and have an advocate on your behalf to make sure that you have a positive experience. Correct?
Yes, exactly. I used to run facilities. I used to be an executive director, and I hate to say it, but it's just true. If there's not family or someone coming around on a regular basis checking on someone, they're going to fall through the cracks. And that's just unfortunately how it is. And it truly is worse since the pandemic, with just no leadership. So
Thanks.
Yeah, yep. Why aging planning, preferably proactive versus crisis mode, is important. Obviously, it improves family communication and family relationships. It reduces caregiver burnout and kids not having to take off work, or kids ending up being your assisted living. It improves the family's ability to make informed decisions about their care options and care needs, especially given the pandemic. It improves the quality care outcomes. It teaches families about different levels of care, so that if mom has dementia, you know that she may at some point need memory care. And what if what if you live in a rural area and there's no memory care available? What are you going to do? Teaches families what to look for and what to ask about when touring care communities, so that you do have some confidence that you're having your loved one go into a community that's going to do right by you. And it teaches families how to be the best advocates for yourselves or for your loved ones. Impact of COVID, I've already covered some of this already, but I can tell you as an example where my mom lived, and this is not uncommon for healthcare during and since the pandemic. She was only there in the memory care facility for 1.5 years, so 1.5 years. They've had 4 executive directors, they've had 4 memory care directors, 4 wellness nurses, and in between all of that, they went weeks and months without an executive director or without a memory care director. And so you've got people who are making $11 or $13 an hour as a CNA or a care worker basically running the place. And that's why we're having more falls and more hospitalizations and residents not getting toileted and all those kind of things because of the impact of COVID. So there are shortages all across the country. This is not going to improve anytime soon. We already knew that healthcare was going to be affected because we had already been losing good quality workers, and now with the pandemic, it's even worse. There's home care companies that I talk to. Again, I have families across the country. There's home care companies that say if Ethel and Marvin don't want a 12-hour shift each shift, we can't staff it. So they can't staff, some of the home care companies can't staff these, we only want someone 4 times a week, 3-hour shifts. They can't staff it because the companions don't want those short shifts because they make more money on the long shifts. Home care companies unable to provide the consistent companions. That's always been a problem, but it's even worse now. Some companions only want to work with vaccinated clients, and some clients only want to work with vaccinated companions. And so there's just a lot that goes into that, why we're having a massive problem with healthcare right now. Senior care communities are short-staffed, and they're expecting families to pay privately for additional care. I have a married couple that's paying $30,000 a month between living in assisted living and then the private duty companion that the facility said, if you want your parents to be toileted and bathed, you're going to have to hire private duty. And plus they have me as a companion as well at my rate. So that's what's happening. Most of my clients that are in facilities, they're also paying basically double because they have a private duty companion so that they might have a chance of getting more care. The neglects that I see, unnecessary hospitalizations. I have a client that's supposed to be wearing compression hose. Why compression hose is important is because it keeps your fluid controlled. They hadn't put him on him for 3 days, and now his legs are like huge, and he can hardly breathe because he's got congestive heart failure, so he's got fluid around his heart. So he ended up in the hospital just because they didn't put his compression hose on for 3 days. So that's the stuff that we see on a daily basis. That's why we're in and out of these facilities regularly. Infections and pressure sores, doctor orders and therapy recommendations are falling through the cracks because there's not enough people to just stay on top of things. So like one of the care facilities I have this married couple in, it's prestigious. I mean, it's one of the nicest ones in town, expensive wise. And they're still having to pay private duty and still having pretty much daily issues with getting the care that he needs. So you need to know how to advocate for yourself. To wrap up, like finally. So the key point, and again, just keep in mind, this is what we see daily. So this is just coming from what I see on a daily basis with the care that folks are getting. That's why I started that nonprofit, to improve the quality of care. So key points: proactive planning will yield better results and outcomes for your entire family versus waiting until you're in crisis reaction mode. Understand caregiver burnout so that you don't end up getting so burned out that your relationships are impacted, your finances are impacted, and your own health is impacted. The consequences of not having an aging plan is what the families are when they come to me. They're burned out, family relationships are strained, and they're resentful of each other. It will move into whichever care community has an opening. If you don't have a plan and you're not on the waiting list of places, you'll go into whatever care community has an open bed, which may or may not be the right fit. And unfortunately, when there's no plan in place, you don't really get a say or a choice in what happens to you, especially if there's no medical directors or care arrangements taken care of. So folks that had a stroke, for example, and they can't really make their decisions, and now their son or daughter is making their decisions. They don't even know which care rehab centers might be options for them. So you just took your ability to make your own choices away from you if you haven't had a plan laid out. And you'll likely not receive the quality of care that you're expecting. Even though you're paying for it, you might not get the quality of care if you don't know how to advocate for yourself or know what to look for and ask about during these facility tours. And the disease progression and aging in general will require an aging plan if having good options is important to you. You're going to want to have an aging plan. So I offer free consults for families, and where we talk about what's working well, what's not working well, and what are the goals. And then I go through what my aging plan services are. Here's the invisible patient as well. So the first 5 people who schedule a free consult will end up getting, I'll ship you the Invisible Patient book. This has been a labor of love. I wrote it myself and not used a ghostwriter. Might rethink that on my next book. But you're gonna get a free book if you book your, for the first 5 people who book a free consult with me today, or not today, but once you hear this, it's the first 5 people will get a free book.
So just make mention of the AMR webinar and how you'd be available for that.
And I actually, in the book, there's 30 some pages of just bullet points. A lot of what I have in that PowerPoint is in here, except in a lot more detail, so that if people want to try to do all this aging planning and facilitate family meetings on their own, there's checklists of scripts and what to say and how do I initiate this conversation with mom and dad, what goes in the grab and go binder, what to look for during the holidays with weight loss or dementia progression, and dings in the car, for example. So it's a really comprehensive kind of how-to guide.
So if people want to investigate the book as well, it can be found at carewriteinc.com as well as Amazon, or what is that the best way to do it? One of those?
Yep, you can actually order it directly on Amazon.
Okay.
The trick about Amazon is I don't know who orders it. So, so if you do order it, just let me know and let me know what you thought of the book, and feel free to write a review if you found it helpful too.
Very good. So this is Annalee's contact information. Annalee, our audience is, I know I did notice we have some attendees who are actually in Florida, as well as, most of our clientele resides in New England for at least part of the year. So maybe you want to just talk about, are you able to be a resource to people outside of your geographic vicinity?
Yeah, actually, I've been virtual since 2012 because the family profile isn't where the kids live down the street from mom and dad anymore. So I've been virtual since 2012 because families they've moved apart for jobs or, marriages or whatever, and families just don't live near each other anymore. So the only way that I could facilitate family meetings was to go virtual. So it doesn't matter where you live. I join in your journey wherever you live and wherever you are, whether you're in a crisis situation or you're in a proactive mindset of, you know what, I don't want to be these statistics that Annalee just rattled off. Let's talk about it proactively. So it does not matter where you live. I use Zoom. I used to use Skype, but now I use Zoom. So that way.
And if people are trying to identify an appropriate location for their needs, you have a network of people that you're able to resource in that effort.
That's right. Okay. That's right. And we do the facility matrix. So we do all of the market research for families when it comes to like their care options. But if they need an attorney or, then we've got people in the network that can help them.
With that, we can take maybe a couple of questions. We've had a couple that have come in. I would just encourage people, if they want to ask a question, use either the Q&A box or the chat feature. You're welcome to raise your hand if that's easier, and if you'd like to do it verbally. We did have a question or two that came in that Kathy had posted in the chat section, in which she had a couple of questions. One is, how long should someone plan for care, and how far in advance? And then how do you begin the conversations with aging
Yep.
parents?
So different ways to look at that is how to have that conversation. You leverage what you know about your parents, right? So if they have a living will or their estate documents in order, that tells you that they have the intellect of working with an attorney to put their legal documents in order. If they have a financial planner, obviously, then that means that they have the intellect of retaining a financial planner to put a financial plan in place. So you can say, well, mom and dad, this is just another professional to add to our team so that we can make sure that you have the best possible care as you age and know what your care options are as you age. So that's how you can that's one way you can start that conversation is, mom and dad, just like you work with these other professionals, CareRight does customized aging plans for our particular family. You can also, I always say, speak from the heart. Mom and dad, we love you, but we don't know what's best for you. And we want to make sure that you have a say in what happens, as you age. We want to make sure that we have a plan put together. Another way you can leverage the conversation or start the conversation is if they've already had a crisis. Maybe mom already fell and broke her hip, and you can leverage that and say, we made it through this crisis, but it made us aware of how ill prepared we are as a family about what our care options are short-term and long-term. So there's different ways that you can initiate that conversation. Then talk about, we need someone to help us develop an aging plan. As far as how long should someone plan for care, we know that people are living longer, and that doesn't mean that they're necessarily living healthily. So that's something that we work together with, like, the financial planner to say, how can we be the best stewards of the finances and pay for the care that they need? So, I always say, because usually the question is, well, when should we start these conversations and when should we start developing an aging plan? And I say right now, because you don't know that tomorrow dad's not going to have a stroke. Or if you're the primary caregiver, you don't know that running out to the grocery store, to the pharmacy, you're not going to get T-boned by a semi. I mean, I was hit by a school bus as a pedestrian. I didn't wake up that morning thinking, oh, I think I'm going to have my whole life devastated. No, like, this stuff happens. So the sooner that we have these conversations, the better, because the what ifs aren't planned. So plan for a long time for care. As far as like dementia, we know that people with dementia can live 25, 28 years once they've been diagnosed. And unfortunately, because by the time families become aware that something's not quite right with mom, she's already had dementia for potentially a number of years before it gets really noticed and then addressed by a physician.
Annalee, one item I would add to the questions that, occasionally we run into people who either are estranged from family or don't have family. And it becomes very challenging to identify who do they turn to be that advocate, that healthcare power of attorney, healthcare proxy, whatever it might be. Or any thoughts to share on that consideration, that challenge?
That's a massive problem, and it's only going to get even worse because families are smaller than they have ever been. When I first started as a social worker 28 years ago, up in Iowa, where I started from, they had 8, 10, 12 kids. Now that's just not the case, right? Like, yeah. I have no kids, so that is something that we talk about in our healthcare circles pretty much every single time that we meet, because more and more people are isolated because they have no family, or they've outlived their kids, or they've never got married. So it's really hard to find professional decision makers because there's a shortage of them as well. And this might be more of a question for our attorney on the call too, but like, I know that we leverage sometimes guardians and conservators, but in Florida, guardians can get paid $65 an hour. So as an advisor, you still have to be thinking about all these extra kind of add-on care charges, so to speak, because someone's going to have to be a decision maker. Otherwise, they'll end up potentially a guardian of the state. So one thing that we talk about is, who is in your circle? Do you have friends? Do you have a niece? Do you have anybody that you would trust to be able to make some decisions on your behalf if they needed to? But that's something that we're going to see, and we see a lot of that also with like our LGBT population who might have been disowned by their kids or their family. They're out there on their own.
Well, a lot to consider. You've given us just an enormous amount of content to give consideration to. Thank you for sharing it all with us. I hope our clients and attendees take this to heart, that it's a challenging subject. There's a lot to consider, and the sooner you plan, the better the opportunity that it's going to go more smoothly and in a manner that's in keeping with your wishes. So get started, maybe get Annalee's book or a grab and go binder, or at least a care plan, an aging care plan. So Annalee, thank you so much. Parting thoughts I will mention to everyone. We've had Annalee on our radio show and on the podcast we do for the Financial Planning Association. Feel free to go see those past episodes. You can find them wherever you get podcasts or on our website, or you can type in Something More with Chris Boyd as well. We do have the radio show every Saturday in different times and different locations, but hope you'll check those out and follow us through our social media. Jeff, any final comments that you'd like to share with everyone?
No, I'll just compliment Annalee. In the past few years, my mother, she's passed away now, but went through that whole cycle, and so did our family. I concur with everything that you said, and starting early and having a plan and getting everybody on the same page, or attempting to anyway, communication, all those things. Because without them, as an attorney, you see families that are destroyed, and resentment does set in. We had a positive experience with the facility that Mom ultimately went to, but as you indicated, we were in there every day, and you do see the difference in people who don't have advocates and people who are there versus the ones that do. So very well done today. Thank you. I look forward to reading your book.
Thank you.
If you have any questions that we can help with the financial planning context in this conversation, certainly reach out to us either through the website, amrfinancial.com, or just give us a call at 866-771-8901. With that, I think we'll wrap things up. And thank you, Annalee. Thanks, Jeff. And thanks to all of you who stuck around with our great presentation today. Again, this will be available on amrfinancial.com in a video recording if you want to catch any repeat aspects of today's talk. Thanks, everybody.
Good. Thank you.